Y'all, there has to be something said for letting go of the tension and anxiety felt around achieving your goals. You know, when you're anxious and you're very outcome oriented, you're tense, or at least I'm tense. And when I let go of the result, I've had almost miraculous results. You know, I'll make an example that I'm sure a lot of guys can understand. I'm sure girls will understand too. Um, how can I say this? All right, so as a man, we get urges and we want to be with a woman, you know. So let's say this, right? So I remember there was a time where I really wanted to make out with my partner, and we lived far apart from each other. We couldn't see each other, and I remember wanted it so bad, and we end up seeing each other like several times, but not in the environment where we had the privacy to make out. And you know, it was really bothering me, and I had this tension and this anxiety about it. And I remember thinking like, damn, like I might never get to experience this, you know. Silly, silly reasoning. Um, and then, you know, I remember just kind of like letting go of the result. And, you know, what's up, Kitty? I feel so weird talking about like intimate stuff with you guys. I'm a very private person. But no, letting go of that like outcome let me have better time with, you know, with my lady, right? It let me have a better time with my lady because I'm not thinking in the back of my head like, will we get the privacy to like make out? Like, when's the right time to make out? Like, you know, this, you know what I'm saying? Like, is the lighting right? Like, oh, is the mood right? Oh, do I gotta say something? Like, oh, am I risen her up well enough? You know what I'm saying? Like, when I let go of the outcome, I wasn't result oriented. I was able to just live in the moment and have a more genuine experience. And you guys, I'm sure you guys know what happens at the end. You know, once I do that, we end up, you know, we just miraculously just end up having all the perfect circumstances line up that we're able to make out. Um, and it's just like, you know, I've had that happen, and I'm sure some of you guys can relate to that. You know, in many different aspects of my life. It's like, I'll give you guys another example. I was live streaming on my other page, my handball page, for I was going for 100 days, and I ended up doing 100 days, but not all in a row. I might have missed like 3 to 4 days that like broke it up, but we did end up getting to 100 days. I think we went more, if I'm not mistaken. But I was doing this and I wasn't working a job, and I remember I was like, you know, I'm gonna make this work. Like, this is gonna afford me my apartment, and you know, the very humble lifestyle that I want to live. And I was banking everything on it, and it wasn't producing what it needed to, right? What I needed it to. And at a point, I kind of let go of the result, and I just kept putting in the work. I just kept putting in work. I ended up starting another channel, putting in work on that channel, and and it turns out this other channel got me. It got me a whole new job. I got hired off this whole other side channel, um, I was discovered, like my work was discovered, and um, I was making content around a big Twitch live streamer, and I got a job from that, and I was completely, I wasn't going into it thinking like, I wasn't thinking about the result at all. I was just like, I'm putting in, I'm taking actionable steps towards, towards my goal of, just being successful, right? For me, success on here is posting frequently, whether the numbers do with whatever, whether there's, whether there's money involved, whether there's virality involved. My part is to get on here and show up on camera, or to, you know, clip whatever I'm clipping and edit up the clips and tell a story, and then write the title and post the video. Like, that's my job, right? So the result is not really entirely in my control, especially when there's other people involved, So all I can really do is my part, and I find that I'm able to do my part more effectively and more like kind of in peace when I'm not thinking about the end result. And it just so happens that, when you're working from a place of confidence and you're working from a place of clear mindedness, you're working from a place of what's the opposite of anxiety, comfort. It just so happens that you end up producing better work than when you're rigid and you're worried and you're, oh, what about this, and oh, what about that, I work with clients now building social media and, boosting people's pages and stuff, and it always gets me when I get people who are like so concerned with the minutia. They're never the super successful people, I'll tell you that much. The people that are more successful, they're not nitpicking over like the little thing here, and oh, what about this there, like, oh, what if we, some of these things are important, right? It's good to cross your T's and dot your I's to an extent, right? To an extent. And ultimately, nobody knows what makes YouTube tick regardless. Nobody, if people had social media down to a science, there would be a book on it, and everyone could just follow the blueprint exactly, and get rich off it. But you can't. That's a, that's not public knowledge. I don't even know that, I guess maybe the YouTube CEO might have that. It's like a Krabby Patty formula locked away in some vault at the YouTube headquarters. They have a 3-person passcode. 3 people need to present their keys to unlock that vault. It's not that down to a science yet that you can say, oh yeah, if I just, you just got to tweak this and it's going to work. I wouldn't even tell anybody that, because in my experience, in my broad experience of many different YouTube channels in many different fields and genres, Instagram, TikTok, Facebooks, the only thing, you can do is kind of imitate what has worked in the past, and, be consistent, and, work on your craft, whatever it is. Get good at whatever you're doing, whether it's comedy, whether it's telling stories, whether it is making cool edits or giving advice. These things can be improved objectively, right? And then there's always these outliers at the same time that are just like super random and don't fit into any of those parameters, yet still, do really well on here. But yeah, I say all that to say, man, it's a message to myself, you guys, and myself, just keep putting in the work and trust that it's gonna work out. I thought that was gonna sound a lot cooler. But no, really though, do your part and let God handle the rest. I love y'all, and I'll see you later. Peace.